Can a single practice session change the course of an entire season? Is this Lewis Hamilton's true awakening with Ferrari? Friday's day at the Autódromo Hermanos Rodríguez was not only the beginning of a new Formula One weekend, it was a quiet but powerful statement from Lewis Hamilton. In a season where every little progress counts, the British driver gave unmistakable signs that his acclimatization period with Ferrari could be entering a new phase. His performance in FP2 was the clearest demonstration so far that the constant, silent, and often undervalued effort he has been making in Maranello is beginning to bear tangible fruit. FP1 left him out of the game, at least in terms of filming. Ferrari had decided that Antonio Fuoco, its reserve driver, should take his seat as part of compliance with young driver regulations. Although many considered this an obstacle for Hamilton, it was actually part of a larger plan. Fuoco focused on validating simulator correlations, working with special sensors, and feeding data to the engineering team. What seemed like a session lost for Hamilton was actually a session won for the collective understanding of the car. And that shared understanding was immediately noticeable when the Briton took to the track in FP2. Once on the track, Hamilton wasted no time in showing what he was capable of. Despite the lack of morning acclimatization, his pace was competitive from his first laps. The most notable thing was not only the stopwatch, but his body language inside the car. With each late braking, each progressive acceleration, each minimal steering correction, it was clear that he had begun to understand the limits of the SF-25 in an environment as demanding as Mexico City, where altitude affects everything, from downforce to engine efficiency and brake behavior. That altitude, which causes cars to lose more than 20% of their effective downforce, tends to reveal chassis weaknesses and the driver's sensitivity to unstable balance. Hamilton, however, used that disadvantage as a tool. He adjusted his driving style, something he had historically been criticized for not doing during his final years at Mercedes. He applied a softer approach, seeking greater cornering speed, reducing unnecessary slippage, and adapting his braking point to take care of critical brake temperatures. This not only shows that Hamilton is still hungry to compete at the highest level, but that he is willing to transform himself technically and mentally to do so. Beyond the qualifying performance, his final position in FP2, fifth, was a quiet affirmation that he is returning to the level that made him one of the greatest drivers of all time. He was only 3/10 behind Verstappen with less preparation and without a prior direct reference on the track that day. He surpassed direct rivals like George Russell, who had had the entire FP1 to prepare his car and maintained a minimum distance from Leclerc, who had been dominating the internal duel at Ferrari since the beginning of the year. These types of performances are not created overnight. They are the result of a combination of factors: adaptation, invisible work, mindset adjustment, and, of course, pure experience. What happened that Friday in Mexico might not immediately be reflected in a podium finish on Sunday, but leaves a clear mark on the development of this season's narrative. Hamilton has stopped being an out-of-tune figure at Ferrari and has become a latent threat, which when he fully awakens, could change the balance of power on the grid. The Mexican GP was not just another event on the calendar. It was the first scene of a possible rebirth, but these modifications were not limited to the visual. Under the skin of the SF-25, engineers introduced a partial redesign of the air channeling system to the radiators, as well as improvements to the insulating materials surrounding the hybrid power unit. The reason was clear. At altitude, the turbos spin at higher revolutions to compensate for the lack of oxygen, which increases internal friction and heat generation. If not managed efficiently, that heat ends up compromising not only the engine, but also the electrical system and electronics of the car. Ferrari approached this with a comprehensive approach, even collaborating with Magneti Marelli to optimize the thermal management systems of the MGUK and the electric inverter. One of the most relevant changes, and at the same time least talked about outside the technical circle, was the implementation of new rear brake ducts. These were significantly wider and designed with a less refined aerodynamic profile, which increased drag but radically improved heat dissipation. This decision was a direct response to what happened in Singapore, where Hamilton experienced a complete left front brake failure, losing more than 40 seconds in 2 laps, and Leclerc had to resort to lift and coast for 63 laps to avoid burning out the braking system. Matteo Tognanelli, Ferrari's chief track engineer, had openly admitted before the weekend in Mexico that the team had gone too aggressive with its cooling in Singapore. This time, the approach was conservative but smart. Instead of looking for last-minute miracles, Ferrari focused on adapting the car to the conditions, even knowing that this would imply a loss of downforce in the fast sections and a top speed penalty on the straight. This approach, although it may seem like a step backwards, is actually a sign of technical maturity. Ferrari understood that altitude is not only a physical challenge, but also a strategic one. Unlike other teams that chose to keep their aerodynamic architecture intact and deal with problems in the race, the Italians anticipated the problem and attacked it at the root. This is where Hamilton's experience also played a key role. His feedback in previous sessions was essential for the engineers to adjust the bonnet ventilation and the thermal behavior of the brakes to his driving style. What happened in FP2 of the Mexican Grand Prix goes beyond simple lap times. In a category as obsessed with precision as Formula One, each outstanding performance outside the established script is also a symbol. And the fifth place achieved by Lewis Hamilton, after not having participated in FP1, represents something much bigger than a momentary improvement. It is potentially the opening of a new chapter, not only in his season, but in his career. It is the sign of a rebirth that few expected to see so soon, much less in such an adverse context. To understand the true symbolic value of this performance, we must first look at the previous narrative. Since his arrival at Ferrari, the story has been marked by constant skepticism. That Maranello's technical style did not fit his way of working. That his age was a limiting factor. That his adaptation to the SF25 was slower than expected. Each session in which Leclerc surpassed him was one more argument to reinforce the theory that his signing had been more of a media move than a sporting one. But in Mexico, at least for a day, that story changed direction. Hamilton not only closed the gap on Leclerc, he reduced it to normal operational margins between two elite pilots. He did it in difficult conditions, with less preparation, and facing the particularities of a circuit that requires a completely different technical approach. But the most important thing is that he did it from a place of control. In his subsequent words, he was dissatisfied with the balance, aware that there is still a lot of work to do. That level of demand with oneself, despite the good result, reveals a mentality focused on the long term. Hamilton didn't celebrate a fifth-place finish as a moral victory. He interpreted it as a foundation on which to build. And here the true symbolism comes into play. Because if there is something that has defined Hamilton's greatness throughout his career, it is his ability to evolve throughout a season. He's had slow starts before, complex adaptations, even periods of uncertainty. But in each of those moments, a pattern has emerged. When you begin to understand the car, when you feel that you are part of it and not an uncomfortable passenger, your performance takes a qualitative leap. Mexico could mark precisely that turning point. When a pilot of his caliber regains a sense of control, his entire environment is transformed. Mechanics work with more precision. Engineers tune more safely. The technical team begins to listen to your suggestions with a different disposition. The confidence of an experienced driver is contagious and can transform an ordinary weekend into the starting point of a structural comeback. It is still too early to say that this was the beginning of a golden era with Ferrari. But what is certain is that the version of Hamilton that appeared in FP2 in Mexico looks much more like the champion who dominated F1 for years than the frustrated driver who struggled with the W14 and W15 at Mercedes. And if that version begins to consolidate, what we have in front of us is not only a story of redemption, but a real threat for anyone who aspires to the title. The Mexican Grand Prix, then, might not be remembered solely for its technical corners or unforgiving altitude. It could be remembered as the place where Ferrari's Hamilton stopped being an experiment and became a tangible reality. Where the seven-time champion stopped looking for his place and began to claim it. Where the symbol of the prancing horse and the legend of the number 44 finally began to gallop in unison. What happened in practice at the Mexican Grand Prix cannot go unnoticed and should not leave any true Formula One fan indifferent. Because what we saw on the track was more than a technical improvement, it was a warning. A silent but powerful warning. Lewis Hamilton is beginning to understand his surroundings, merge with the SF25, and most importantly, build a competitive base from which he can begin to attack. So now the inevitable question is, was this an isolated spark, an illusion created by particular conditions? Or are we truly facing the beginning of something much bigger? Do you think this result represents the true potential of the Hamilton-Ferrari duo? Or was it simply a Good Friday that will not necessarily be repeated in qualifying or the race? And if you're a fan of another team, are you worried about this quiet rise of a champion who seems to be finding his form just when he's needed most? Subscribe if you are not subscribed, and leave us your opinion on all of this.